Hello and welcome to the Fanfiction Variety Podcast, where I read fanfiction. Today, we're going to look at a fic which really needs more attention. A pretty good story, which... It's a crossover between Doctor Who and Neon Genesis Evangelion. You know, the two best things to cross together. By Machiavelli. We have series 30 3/4, or as it's otherwise known, Shinji and the Doctor. Today I'll be reading the first episode of this series. It was raining the day Shinji met the Doctor. He had just run away from the apartment he shared with his commanding officer. He knew he had to go back. Instead, he sat on the train he had chosen at random, listening to the same two tracks on his father's tape player over and over again. The hours passed. The rain continued to fall. People came and went from the train, talking and laughing silently beyond his headphones. He told himself that it didn't matter. Sometime after sunset, he noticed a new sound above that of the music, a strange high-pitched buzzing in his left ear. He tried his best to ignore it, but in time it started to bother him. Shinji reluctantly paused the tape player and turned to the left. There was a man sitting next to him, a tall, gangly foreigner in a long brown coat. On his lap, he held an old paint can, out of the top of which ran a large collection of wires and antennas. How he'd managed to get that thing through the security checkpoint, Shinji couldn't begin to guess. The man was poking at the contraption with what looked like a blue penlight. Excuse me, Shinji said, or tried to. It didn't really come out. He cleared his throat and tried again. Excuse me, I'm sorry, but could you please stop that? Huh? The man glanced towards Shinji. As he did, the penlight slipped out of his hand. The tape player abruptly sparked and shorted out in Shinji's hands. He yelped and jumped to his feet, then immediately sat down again. His legs had been asleep for hours. The tape player dropped to the floor. Oh, sorry, the tall man said. He spoke surprisingly good Japanese, if with an odd accent. Sorry, my fault. You alright then? He reached down and scooped up the tape player. Shinji said. Here, let me fix that. The man picked up the penlight and held it to the tape player. It's been on the same resonance frequency as the tape. You just don't see too many cassette players around anymore. Mind you, they're brilliant, lost art and all that. Used to have one of these myself. Gorgeous sound quality. Well, up until I had to use it as a trigger for an antimatter bomb. Still wasn't bad after that, though. Shinji said. There you are, good as new. The man handed Shinji the tape player. Ordinarily, I might have avoided the warranty a bit. Sorry. I'm the doctor, by the way. What's your name? Shinji swallowed. This wasn't fair, he thought. He wasn't in the right state of mind to deal with anyone right now. Much less this sort of person. Shinji. Ah, Shinji. It's a brilliant name, the doctor said cheerfully. He started to poke at the wires coming out of the paint bucket with the penlight. It's one of those names where anything you get involved in sounds all deep and symbolic. Like Paul, or David, or Jesus, I suppose. Mind you, we always insisted we call him Josh. Not much for formalities, that one. Shinji tried for a weak smile. Is that so? One of the wires the doctor was holding sparked. On top of the paint can, a tiny satellite dish started to spin around. The doctor looked pleased. Oh, there we go. Now we got a live one. He gestured to the can. Rift Energy Collector. See, there's this great big dimensional rift floating around above the city. Kind of like a big crack in the fabric of space and time. Lets out a lot of energy if you know what to look for. Uh-huh. Maybe if he just kept agreeing with him, Shinji thought, the man would stop talking. Fell through it myself. The rift, I mean. Banged up my ride a bit in the process. Should be able to fix it, once I've got enough power to put back together. The doctor flicked a switch on the side of the paint can, off and on a few times. Problem is, the rift doesn't have any kind of fixed position. It keeps moving all over the place. So I threw this rig together with a spare magnetic bottle and a fission battery, and I went after it. Figured a nice big loop around the city was just what I needed, so here I am. How about you? Huh? The question caught Shinji off guard. You've been on this train longer than I have. The doctor bent down a stray antenna. "So you when I got on, and we've been round the city at least twice, so you're not taking the train anywhere in particular. So why'd you get on?" "Oh, the train entered a tunnel." The doctor waited patiently. Shinji sighed. This really wasn't fair at all. "It's complicated," he said at last. "Usually is," the doctor said. That was when the train slowed and came to a stop, right in the middle of the tunnel. Shinji heard the brakes scream. Above his head, his duffel bag slid to the end of the rack. The doctor glanced around the car curiously. "Right, I'm pretty sure I didn't do that." The train's public address system cracked to life. "Attention," said a male voice. "This is your driver speaking. We are experiencing a temporary technical fault within the engine. We are working to solve the problem and should be..." The speakers abruptly cut out, as did the lights. All of the lights. "All of that," the doctor added in the darkness. It was pitch black inside of the train car. As far as Shinji could tell, every single light, both inside the train and outside in the tunnel, had gone dead all at once. Next to him, he heard the doctor scramble around. "Well, a tick. I have one somewhere." There was a sharp crack that sounded like a bone breaking in two. Then he could see the doctor sitting next to him, holding up a bright green glow stick, like the ones in earthquake kits. "Right, that's better now, isn't it?" The doctor glanced around the car. "I'm guessing that this sort of thing doesn't happen too often around here." Shinji shook his head. The doctor sighed. "Blimey, what is it about me and public transportation? Could have sworn trains were still alright." "Mommy, who turned out the lights?" a child's voice asked. "Shh. You heard the driver? They're fixing it." Shinji looked down the train car. There were 3 other people in the compartment. A middle-aged woman and her son, who looked to be about 3 or 4 years old, and a young woman in a secretary's uniform, who was looking through her purse. "Here, hold this." The doctor handed Shinji the glow stick. Shinji took it without thinking. The doctor pushed a paint can onto the seat next to him and stood up. "Everyone all right down there?" "Yes, thank you," the mother said politely. The office lady groaned and held up a cell phone. "There's no service," she said. "We must be too far into the tunnel. I can't even text." The phone let out a musical tone and died. She banged it against the side of her seat. "Aw, come on, damn it. I just charged this thing, I swear." There was a knock at the door to the next car. A middle-aged man with a thinning hairline slid it open and stuck his head in. "Is that a light?" he asked. "And more where that came from, I think," the doctor said. He started to rummage through the pockets of his coat. "Ah, is that so?" The middle-aged man wandered on into the train car, a rolled-up magazine under one arm. He was followed by a young salaryman with 5 o'clock shadow that looked at least 3 days old, a beat-up suit jacket thrown over one shoulder. Before Shinji knew it, they were all gathered at the center of the train car. In addition to the glow stick, the doctor had managed to unearth a candle, 2 flashlights, neither of which worked, and what appeared to be a small oil-burning lantern from out of his coat. He stood toward the center of the group. "So, names! I like names. Names are a good start. I'm the doctor, and, you..." "Kotono Miyamura," said the secretary. "And that was Dr..." "Just the doctor, that's all." "I'm Izumi Yamashita," said the mother. "And this is Hiroshi." The little boy waved shyly. "Call me so," said the salaryman. "Everyone does." The middle-aged man with the magazine raised his hand. "Yuichi Sadamoto, pleased to meet you." He looked at Shinji. "Shinji Ikari," he said. He knew immediately that he had made a mistake. The train car fell silent. As in, Commander Ikari? You're the Evangelion pilot?" An Eva pilot?" Mrs. Yamashita's voice quacked a little. "Are you serious?" Shinji stared down at the floor. It really wasn't fair, he thought, and no matter how much you might wish you could melt into the ground and disappear, it never seemed to happen. "So, I was thinking, since it's been a while here and there's no sign of the train coming back on, it might not be a bad idea for us to go up to the engine, see what's going on and all." "Good idea," Mr. Sadamoto said. "I'll tell you what. While you're at it, I'll go and check the rest of the train. There might be people too far down from us to see the light. By yourself? Mr. Sadamoto waved a hand. Oh, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. If I just borrow one of your lights, sir. The doctor handed the candle and a small book of matches to him. Mr. Sadamoto gave him a small bow, then left the car the way he came. Shinji heard that buzzing noise again. He looked over and saw the doctor holding the penlight thing up against the palm of his hand. This works. Good, he heard the doctor murmur. Things suddenly looked a bit darker in the train. Shinji glanced at the glow stick he was holding. Excuse me, he asked. Mr. Doctor? Yes? Shinji held up the glow stick. Is it supposed to change color like that? The doctor looked at him. Like what? It looks the same to me? Then why? It was strange, Shinji thought. It was very strange. Just moments before, the glow stick had been letting off a sickly green light, but now it seemed to be glowing red. Blood red, in fact. And it was everywhere, especially on his hand. Oh, Shinji heard himself say. It was strange. The train was nearly silent, but all of a sudden, every sound, every breath, every movement, every heartbeat seemed deafening to him. He pressed his hands at his ears, which was good, since then he didn't have to look at them. And the train was red, and the city was red, and everything was red. He could hear the doctor saying something, but he couldn't make out the words over the cry of cicadas and his own screams and the pain in his side, and he could feel the burns on his face. And why couldn't the father told him it would hurt so much? And he could see his hands, Ava's hands on the knife, and hear Masato screaming in his ear, and then... He woke up sometime later, lying flat on his back. He could smell cigarettes and feel something metal pressing up against the top of his head. He opened his eyes. He was stretched out across a number of train seats, the doctor's paint can next to him. The lantern, now lit, was sitting in the middle of the train car. The salaryman, the office lady, and the mother, her son asleep beside her, sat at the opposite end of the compartment, whispering to each other. The salaryman, Mr. Sato, that was his name, and Miss Miyamura were both smoking. They didn't seem to have noticed that Shinji had woken up. He saw no reason to let them know otherwise. He shut his eyes again. He heard one of the doors to the other train cars slide open. Oi! The doctor sounded annoyed. I thought I told you lot to keep an eye on him. We can see him just fine from here, said Mr. Sato. Did you find anything at the engine, doctor? Nothing. Everything's shut down. Radio, lights, engine, the whole bit. No sign of the driver either. Maybe he's gone down the tunnel to get help, said Mrs. Yamashita. Hope so. The doctor walked further into the car. But seriously, what are you doing leaving him on his own? Can't you see he's not well? Well, of course, but Mrs. Yamashita hesitated, then continued in a hushed tone. It's against the law, isn't it? Disturbing him or asking him questions or anything, I mean. There's a fine just for talking to him without official permission, said Sato. Even prison time if the judge doesn't like your face. I should know, I'm a lawyer. Shinji blinked. No one had told him that. Are you serious? The doctor sounded shocked. Why? Well, he's an Evangelion pilot. If he said something that bothered him or made him angry, he might not be able to make it move anymore. And then we'd all be dead, wouldn't we? The doctor sighed. Right, let's start from the beginning then. What's an Evangelion? You don't know? Miss Miyamura asks sharply. They're the giant robots all the papers talk about. The ones that protect the city from the aliens. You're kidding me. Giant robots? Always wondered why they don't just stick the same weapons on a plane or something, said Sato. Secretary General must be a Gundam fan. It's different, I have to give it that. Tell me about these aliens. The angels? How could you not know about the angels? Oh, I don't get out much, the doctor said vaguely. I'm a bit of a hermit and all that. You missed the gigantic aliens trying to kill us all. Is that what the noise was? I was wondering. But let me get this straight. Giant robots fighting off massive alien creatures in a city. Shinji could practically hear the doctor grin from across the room. Oh, this is Japan, isn't it? Until one of them kills someone you know, Miss Miyamura said darkly. Right, sorry, so alien invasion, giant robots, got it. But why him as the pilot, though? He can't be more than, 13, 14, not even close to recruitment age. They have to be that young, said Mrs. Yamashita. That's what they say. Something about a brain interface. If anyone older tries it, they just go mad. I've heard they're all genetically engineered super soldiers. Trained, Sato said. Trained from birth and all that. Yeah, can't really say I'm getting that special forces vibe from him. Well, it was just a rumor, Sato shrugged. By the way, Miss Miyamura asked Sato, how did you know he was a pilot? My firm has YISA level security clearance. We handle all of the Ava property damage lawsuits. He's named in half of them. Sorry, the doctor said. Just to make sure I have this straight. 14 years old, fate of the world on his shoulders, fighting in a war. It's against the law to talk to him, even just to say thank you. But people can still sue him. They try, but they really can't. State security and all that. Judge usually throws them out the moment they show up in court. Sweet gig, Miss Miyamura observed. It pays the bills. God, Mrs. Yamashita said softly. He looks so young, doesn't he? Yes, he agreed, his voice suddenly quiet. He does. They fell silent after that, which was good, Shinji thought. All the talking was starting to make his head hurt. Then he heard footsteps nearby. All right there? The doctor asked. Feeling any better? Shinji opened his eyes. You could tell I was awake. Saw you blink, the doctor said. He was standing next to Shinji, the glow light in hand. Besides, it's not like you could have slept through all that. How do you feel? Alright, I guess. The doctor pointed the buzzing pen light thing at Shinji, then looked at it. Pulse and temperature looked normal. That was a pretty severe panic attack you just had. You get many of those? Shinji looked away. Sometimes. You should be getting treatment for that. Shinji pointed at the light. What is that thing anyway? Oh, this? The doctor glanced at it. Screwdriver? Really? Sure, why wouldn't it be? The doctor pocketed the device. Shinji rubbed his head still hurt. Why are you talking to me anyway? Didn't you hear what they said? You could get arrested. The doctor grinned. You'd have to catch me first. Alright if I asked you a question? What? These angels they said you were fighting, they wouldn't happen to be weeping, would they? Made out of stone most of the time? No, they're big and... Shinji couldn't think of a better word. Squishy. Yeah, that's for the best then. The doctor leaned forward and looked out the window. I'll tell you what isn't, though. That. Shinji looked. It was still pitch black in the tunnel outside of the car. It took him a moment to realize the doctor was staring at the window itself, or rather, at the thin layer of frost on the outside of it. Is it just me, the doctor said quietly, or did it feel like it was summer outside earlier on tonight? Shinji's hand against the window. It felt cold to the touch. What does it mean? Something's draining the energy out of this entire area. There was an odd tone to the doctor's voice. He pressed a single finger against the window. Just about everything outside the visible spectrum. Electricity, radio waves, infrared, even heat. Shinji eyed the paint can on the seat next to him. Didn't you say that thing was an energy collector? Nah. Good catch, though. I shut that thing down as soon as the lights went out. This is something else. Like what? Could be anything. Spaceship in orbit trying to collect power? Something trying to map itself onto the local reality? Certain kinds of curling irons? He looked back at Shinji. Think you can walk? Shinji nodded. Good. The doctor turned toward the frost, an odd look in his eye. I think it's time we get moving. It took surprisingly little effort to get the others to agree to leave the train car. The only one who needed convincing was Mr. Sato. I've seen too many horror movies like this, he said. His arms crossed. The heroes start heading to safety only to get picked off one by one. Well, sure, said the doctor. Good point, but what about the one who thinks he's playing it safe, only to ironically be the first one attacked? Sato sighed and stood up. Touché. They started to walk through the cars toward the back of the train, Shinji holding his glow stick, Mr. Sato carrying the lantern. The doctor, paint can under one arm, walked in front of Miss Miyamura. By the way, the doctor said conversationally to her, I've been meaning to ask, could I borrow your radio? You mean my cell phone? No, I mean your radio, the one you keep in your purse next to the handgun. Everyone stopped in their tracks. She has a gun? Sato asked. So did Mr. Sadamoto, the doctor said matter-of-factly, rolled up in his magazine. The only reason I let him go off on his own. Miss Miyamura sighed. I guess it can't be helped then. She took a badge from her purse and showed it to the group. Nerve Intelligence, Public Safety and Security Division. Mr. Sadamoto is my partner. A security agent? Mrs. Yamashita exclaimed. What are you doing here? What do you think? Keeping an eye on him. Miss Miyamura pointed a thumb at Shinji. Shinji blinked. Isato sent you? Captain Katsuragi, Miss Miyamura said, a slight note of disdain in her voice. Didn't have to. You're a pilot. We're always watching. She reached into her purse and threw a small gray box at the doctor. Here, it's not picking up anything, though. I've already tried. The doctor caught the box in his free hand and examined it. Military grade, shielded power source, brilliant. I'll see if I can boost the signal on this. As long as you can walk and do that, fine. Miss Miyamura pulled the handgun out of her purse and clipped it to the belt of her dress. And incidentally, Doctor, we're gonna have a talk after this is over. A long talk. The doctor grinned. Can't wait! Miss Miyamura narrowed her eyes. Come on, then. She waved the group to follow her. They went through the next few train cars in silence. It lasted until someone's stomach grumbled. Shinji realized, to his surprise, his own. That's right, he thought. He hadn't had anything to eat that day, had he? Here. Shinji turned his head. Mrs. Yamashita was walking next to him, her son by her side. She held the candy bar out to Shinji. Shinji took it. Oh, thank you. I've been thinking, she said, her voice trembling a little. I probably won't get the chance to say this, so I just wanted to say, thank you. Thank you so much. Shinji stared at her. You're welcome. She smiled and pulled Hiroshi a little closer to her side. I suppose you don't hear very much from people outside the organization, but everyone really does. Hey, who's that? Sato asked. He had stopped short and was holding up the lantern. At the very end of the train car they had just entered, Mr. Sadamoto was sitting back in one of his seats, his magazine spread out over his face. He looked like he was sleeping. Oh, come on, Miss Miyamura shouted. Shinji jumped back from her a little. You can't possibly be napping at a time like this, you lazy bastard. She snatched the glow stick out of Shinji's hand and started to stride down to the other end of the car. The doctor reached out and grabbed the cuff of her sleeve. Don't, he said. Seriously, don't. She shook him off. It's fine, she growled. He's always doing this. She stomped off. It's like she's never seen a movie before, Sato said. The doctor shook his head and called out, Miss Miyamura! Kotono! We still don't know what we're dealing with here! Until we do... The car fell silent. Shinji... It took Shinji a moment to realize a word had come from underneath the magazine. Mr. Sadamoto whispered again. What, are you hurt? Miss Miyamura had reached his side. Fine, let me see. She reached over and pulled the magazine off. A lot of things happened at once. Mrs. Yamashita screamed. Sato dropped the lantern on the floor and backed up to the wall. Miss Miyamura leapt back and drew her pistol. Shinji stayed completely still, like he was rooted to the ground. He stared at the thing at the other end of the train. Bone had grown out through Mr. Sadamoto's face, pushing past flesh and cartilage and eyes. The protrusion, though it had come out at an uneven angle, resembled a white mask with two dark spots for eyes and a long point at the chin, like the skull of a bird, and Shinji knew what it was. What is that? The doctor asked. He sounded almost fascinated. Oh, God, Sato said. He looks just like the angel. The one from the first attack. It was hunched form onto its feet. There was a sound of bone cracking and splintering. Its arms immediately grew to twice their length, its fingers resembling long needles. There was a click from Miss Miyamura's gun. Get the pilot out of here, she said. That's an order. No, don't! The doctor shouted. Miss Miyamura fired 2 shots straight into the angel. There was a flash. 2 flashes. The lights in the car suddenly flickered on and off. The angel hadn't moved. It reached out for her. She fired again. The train's lights once again came on for a split second. It grabbed her wrists and pointed them away with one hand. With the other, it grasped her neck. Shinji couldn't move. He couldn't look away. He could only watch as the angel started to pull. The doctor grabbed Shinji and forcibly turned him away. He pointed the screwdriver at the exit out of the car. The door burst open. Everyone out! He shouted. Run! He pushed Shinji out of the door. Shinji ran. It was cold outside the train. Freezing. Shinji ran blindly through the dark. You could hear Hiroshi crying in the distance. The doctor shouted, Whatever you do, just keep running. Don't look back. Then Shinji tripped over something and went sprawling onto the ground. He picked himself up and tried to get his bearings. He had gotten separated from the group. He could hear Hiroshi wailing somewhere in the distance to his left. He glanced back at the train car. He saw the angel. It leapt out of the open doorway, its shape silhouetted by the light from the lantern Sato had dropped. It paused for a moment. Then it turned to its right, away from Shinji, toward the direction the others had run. Shinji realized he was still holding the candy bar. It had partially melted in his hand. Hey! He shouted. Hey! The shape of the angel turned toward him. Leave them alone! Shinji's voice cracked. His entire body was shaking. He couldn't help it. I'm the one you want, right? I'm the one who killed you! I'm sorry! He felt tears running down his face. God, he thought. I'm pathetic. He drew in a breath. Just get it over with already! Just get it over with! He waited. He could hear its footsteps coming toward him in the dark. He shut his eyes. He didn't want to see anything. There was a buzzing noise. Shinji looked up. The angel was right in front of him, barely an arm's length away. A glowing yellow octagon hung in the air before it. Just to Shinji's left, the doctor stood, his screwdriver pointed at the angel. Nice force field, the doctor said. Very nice. Stop my sonic cold. But you know what? The way the lights were going on back in the train car, I bet you can't do that and keep draining the power at the same time. Which means you really shouldn't be standing there. Shinji looked down. The angel was standing on top of one of the train rails. There was an explosion of sparks. The angel screamed. The doctor grabbed Shinji by the back of his shirt and pulled him back. Everything went dark again. There was the sound of something shaking and the smell of burned meat in the air. And the lights came back on. The first thing Shinji did when the lights came back on was to vomit uncontrollably on the doctor's shoes. The doctor winced, but said nothing. Shinji looked up. The angel thing lay collapsed on the ground, burned and shriveled. It looked smaller than it had seemed in the dark. The signal and work lights throughout the tunnel had turned back on, as had the fluorescents back in the train. At the far end of the tunnel, he could see the rapidly receding figures of Sato and Mrs. Yamashita carrying Hiroshi in her arms. And he could hear the sounds of approaching sirens. All right then, the doctor asked cheerfully. Physically, at least? All limbs and major organs still in the right spots? Shinji nodded. Right, come on then, let's eat. What about Mrs. Yamashita? Asked Shinji. And Hiroshi? Oh, they'll be fine now. You never want to stick around for the cleanup on these things. Small rooms, too many questions, lots of raiding around, and, besides, the doctor looked Shinji in the eye. She said that you were being watched. If you really want to be free from it all, at least for a little while, this might be your one chance. Shinji glanced down the tunnel where the others had gone. He could see flashing lights in the distance. Up to you, though, the doctor said. He strolled off casually toward the other end of the tunnel. away from the sirens, paint can in hand. Shinji hesitated, then ran to catch up. They found a gas station a few miles down the track. It was open, but they weren't accepting credit cards. The doctor eventually managed to unearth 3 surprisingly crisp 500 yen notes from his pockets, enough for 2 cups of tea and a handful of candy bars. Across the street from the station, there was a park that looked toward the city. "You want to drink that tea," the doctor advised as they sat down on a bench. "Helps with the nightmares, I find." "Oh, look at that! They lower into the ground. That's brilliant." He watched as the downtown skyscrapers rose and fell in the distance, a grin on his face. Not to mention practical, what with the giant monsters and all. Shinji quietly ate one of the chocolate rice cakes. It was one of the ones with vanilla. The station hadn't had any of the caramel. Eventually he asked, "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Being this kind to me." "Well," the doctor said, "thing is, I get curious about things, that's all. Just the way I am. I see something that doesn't quite make sense, it'll drive me mad until I've got it figured out. And right now, I'm wondering how a 14-year-old boy in modern Japan winds up with post-traumatic shock syndrome." "What's that?" Shinji asked. "You mean they haven't told you?" The doctor sighed. "Oh, never mind, of course they haven't. You'll really want to look that up at some point. Look, just start at the beginning and tell me everything. Please." "Why?" "Because if you don't, it'll tear your mind apart." The doctor seemed to be looking past Shinji somehow. Some place and time only he can see. All the things you can't bear to think about. All the memories you wish you could forget. They build up. Until one day, you'll look at yourself in a mirror and you won't be able to recognize yourself. That's what they can take from you, if you let them. Shinji stared into the styrofoam teacup. "It's a long story," he finally said. "I have time." They sat on the park bench. Eventually, Shinji started to talk. It was the first time that Shinji had ever told someone the entire story. About his father summoning him to the city after years with no contact. About how it turned out that his father was commander of an entire military organization dedicated to turning back the invasion. About the first angel attack and being told that he had to fight, and the injured girl they'd brought in on the gurney to send in his place when he tried to refuse. How they hadn't told him that he'd be able to feel everything that the Evangelion felt. And that horrible first battle. And how he hadn't been able to use his left arm for days. And the days of training afterwards. And being taken in by his commander, Misato. And the boy who had hit him at school because he let his little sister get injured. And then the battle with the second angel and feeling it rip through the Ava's side like it was his own. And running away. All the while knowing that he'd have to go back eventually. It's not like he had any other place to go. And the worst part of this is, no one seems to get that I'm the worst possible choice for all of this. Shinji's voice felt scratchy. He couldn't remember the last time he talked this much. I'm everything that a pilot shouldn't be. I'm weak and spineless and a coward. Right, stop it right there, said the doctor. Don't say that. Don't even think that. Not even for a second. And you know why? Fate of humanity put on your shoulders, thrown into a war, no training, no preparation, no support. To go through something like that. To survive. And to still care about people once it's over. That's not just satisfactory. That's incredible. Shinji crossed his arms. But why couldn't I... Why do I have to be so... Words failed him. Why do I have to be so... me? You what, be human? As opposed to just an unthinking, unfeeling weapon? The doctor sighed. Shinji, listen to me. You're 14 years old. You can't properly hate yourself. You barely even started to figure out who you are. Well, the doctor scratched the side of his nose. Say, you do seem to have established one thing definitively. I mean, what with the way you risked your life earlier tonight for the sake of a few people that you'd only just met. But, Shinji said, the doctor cut him up. Up. Doesn't matter why you think you did it. The point is you did. And what about before that, when you nearly got yourself killed so that poor girl wouldn't have to? You can be anyone or anything you want to be, Shinji Ikari. You still have time. But trust me, because I know. Because I know you are not, and will never be, a coward. Shinji didn't know what to say to that. The doctor toward the city. Look at it. He smiled. You know what the amazing thing about this island is? I've seen it destroyed so many times. Earthquakes and wars and great waves and solar flares. You know what? No matter how many times you get knocked down, no matter how much you lose, you keep coming back. You keep rebuilding and building and building, no matter what, until you're one of the most advanced and respected nations on the planet. That strength's your birthright, Shinji. It'll be there when you need it. Well, it won't be quite that simple, of course, but he looked back. Shinji had fallen asleep. The doctor took a sip from his cup of tea. Long day, he said to no one in particular. Captain Misato Katsuragi liked to think of herself as a patient woman, at least under the proper circumstances. Circumstances which did not include being woken up at 4 in the morning with very bad news. Widen the search perimeter to 10 kilometers, she barked into the phone as she put her shoes on. I don't care who you have to wake up, just get it done. She slammed the phone down and headed for the door. She got 3 steps before it rang. She grabbed it off the hook. What? Oh, it's you, Ritsuko. No, they still haven't found him. I was just about to go join the search. Well, it can't hurt, can it? She paced restlessly through the empty apartment. Alright, I'm sorry. God, what a nightmare. I don't know what intelligence is doing these days. First they disobey my orders not to follow him. Then they wait hours to tell me there's been an attack. She waved her hand. Of course I know that. That's not the point. She stopped outside the door to Shinji's room, or what had been his room. The door had been left slightly ajar. She reached out to close it, and saw Shinji, asleep on the bed. She froze in place. Ritsuko, she whispered into the phone. Can I call you back? She hung up without waiting for an answer. She slid the door open and stepped into the room. Shinji stirred a little, but didn't wake up. She stared at him. But how did he... She asked out loud. She'd been in the apartment all night. She hadn't slept all that well, and she hadn't heard the door open. A few blocks away, there was a buzzing noise. A hidden camera switched off. Just for a second. And this has been another episode of the Fanfiction Variety Podcast. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, well, please like, comment, subscribe for more episodes. You might hear more episodes when I get around to it. I mean, if you want more, just wait. Thank you. Have a good one.